listening to Weekend from the BBC World Service. It's nearly 6:47 GMT. To Europe, and one of the stories in the headlines this year has been immigration from Africa and the Middle East. Record numbers trying to make it this year to Europe's shores, causing headaches for governments around the continent. What you're about to hear is a story from a previous surge in migration. It's the story of Sami Barkal, a Syrian who left Kobani at the age of 13 when it was bombed by Islamic State in 2014. First, he spent long hours harvesting and packing fruit in Turkey. Then in 2018, he decided to join the hundreds of asylum seekers walking the snowy paths of the Balkan route daily, trying to reach Central Europe via Bosnia. He told Weekend what happened next.
Was ich an der Grenze Bosnien-Kroatien erlebt habe, war vorher unvorstellbar.
The things I saw at the border of Bosnia and Croatia, I couldn't have imagined. I had come from Syria, fleeing the war, and I was just a child. The evening I took the video, I was walking towards the border with Croatia. We suddenly heard cries, people screaming. I was speechless. My body started to shake. Then a man walked towards us. His face was covered in blood. We tried to help him. I passed this video on to a journalist. I wanted people to see how the police played with our lives, as if we were nothing. Violence was happening every day. But it seems that Europeans didn't know what was being done in their name.
Aber nicht mal die Europäer wussten, was mit ihren Namen gemacht wird.
Well, the video that Sami filmed went viral.
هذا الكرواتي عم يعذب اللاجئين والمهاجرين.
He's whispering into his phone. The Croatian police are torturing them, and you could hear screams and the sound of truncheons striking flesh in the distance. Well, now in Germany, where he's been granted asylum, Sami and two other Syrians have taken Croatia's authorities to the European Court of Human Rights in the first challenge to its practice of pushbacks into Bosnia. And here's what he hopes to achieve.
Ich gehe vor Gericht, weil ich Gerechtigkeit möchte. Aber
I went to court to get some justice. Although this case won't change so much in my life now, I'm now in Germany. I go to school. I have a job. I'm doing okay. But I want Croatia to stop mistreating people for years on end. I really have strong hopes that this court will see us as humans, treat us like humans, and help put an end to pushbacks.
Und den Pushback ein Ende setzt.
Well, Sami Barkal and the two other Syrians are represented in court by lawyers for the European Centre for Constitutional and Human Rights. That's an independent, non-profit, non-governmental organisation based in Berlin. And I've been speaking to Hanaa Hakiki, one of the lawyers. How typical is this case?
It's sadly extremely typical. We have no statistic data because those pushback policies and practices are secret. And in all countries, the pattern that we see is that states do everything they can so that we can't actually track the actions of the officers that carry out these pushbacks. So, for example, the radios are turned off, the people are not registered or recorded, the detention places are secret and unofficial. And this is really a pattern that we see everywhere, from Croatia to Greece to Bulgaria to Hungary to Spain. And so it's difficult to have numbers. The few numbers that we got from those human rights institutions that were able, because they were mandated to go to borders, are scary. So, for example, in Croatia, the only institution that could go and that could get hold of some evidence was the Committee for the Prevention of Torture of the Council of Europe. And they somehow got hold of an informal paper that showed that in 18 days, over 2,000 people had been pushed back on a section that represented only 3% of the land border of Croatia. We don't know if it's in the 10,000s, of hundreds of thousands, but it's really a lot of people that are handled informally and secretly, and to whom anything can happen, from torture to rape to death to informal expulsions, of course, always. This is really a grave situation at our borders.
And by highlighting this and taking his case to the European Court of Human Rights, what do you hope to achieve?
Well, the court has already acknowledged that Croatia has a state policy of pushbacks. But we want the court to go further because it has acknowledged so in an incredibly exceptional and dramatic case of the death of a 6-year-old, little Medina Husseini. And we want the court to go further and to reaffirm as a principle that state agents cannot and should not be allowed to informally deal with people, be it at our borders, be it in our cities and in our police stations, because we know that when we allow that, it is when abuses happen.
Do you have any sympathy with the argument that says the process that should be followed here is workable when the numbers are manageable? We're now talking about vast numbers of people who, through no fault of their own, are fleeing war and persecution, and we have a system in place that simply cannot cope with it.
I think the system can cope when there's political will for it to cope, and this is exactly what the Ukrainian situation has shown. Unfortunately, there is no political will because migrants and refugees coming from the global south are used as scapegoats for other political problems that we have, such as unemployment and the defunding of healthcare or education. But they're not the source of those problems, and they don't have the means to actually bring solutions. Our politicians do. These are not so many people. We are not meeting our obligations. Europe has a bit over 13 million refugees. Turkey and Iran alone have half of that. What do Turkey and Iran represent in terms of global wealth that they can manage and we say we can't? I don't buy that argument. We don't want to.
You say the politicians don't want to act out the process that we've just described. Is there not also a point that a lot of the populations of the various countries where they are elected are keen to put more pressure on them to be tougher, to resist some of what we've just described?
I think that is true, but I think historically we've seen that those narratives, those anti-migrant narratives, are actually fed to people. It's easier to tell people be angry at migrants than to tell them, actually, we're failing you. And it is really sad, actually, that the only thing, apparently, that European Union member states can agree on is to strip migrants and refugees of their rights. It's very telling. It's not going to solve our problems.
Finally, if this case goes in Sami's favour, what are the implications of that?
The implications would be that finally the European Court of Human Rights, because it has been refusing to do so far, would acknowledge that pushbacks are a word that defines a myriad of human rights violations and that they are not acceptable.
Hanaa Hakiki, lawyer for the European Centre for Constitutional and Human Rights in Berlin.